Hi, welcome back to McClutchy Maths. My name is Natalie McClutchy and today we are continuing our series on how to write a PSMT, and our focus in this video is on communication, and it's in our 10th video in this series, and we're looking here at coherent and concise organisation. So in this video aimed at Queensland students, you're going to find out what it means to be coherent, what it means to be concise, what organisation is meant for your assignment, and also looking at appropriate structure for your assignment as well. So let's get straight into it by looking at our ISMG, the Instrument Specific Marking Guide, and this is the section for communication. And we want to be looking at this particular box today: coherent and concise organisation of the response, appropriate to the genre, including a suitable introduction, body and conclusion, which can be read independently of the task sheet. There is a lot in this particular criteria here. Now we know we're not writing an English assignment, we're writing a maths assignment. So there's some important things that you need to know that might be a little bit different to some of your humanities reports. So firstly, let's talk about what it means to be coherent. Having a natural or due agreement of parts, connected, consistent, logical, orderly, well structured, it makes sense. It's rational. The big one is, does it make sense? A lot of the time we read assignments as teachers and we can't work out what on earth you're saying. So there's some great tips I've got in this video for how to check that out. So firstly, read it aloud to yourself. Great thing to do before you hand it in, read the whole assignment out loud. Are your sentences too long? Sometimes sentences that go on and on and on and ramble, they lose their coherence. It's very hard to understand what you're saying or where you're going. Chop your sentences up. Is it hard to understand what you're talking about? That is also a thing to check out to yourself when you're reading it out loud. Did you use any words that are spelt correctly but are wrong for the sentence? And here is a student example. In this particular one, it says it is obtuse that the leg length is longer than the aim length. Well, we've got two spelling mistakes here. They're actually words that are spelt correctly. The word obtuse should be the word observed in here, and they've simply just typed the wrong word, but it completely mucks up the coherence of the sentence. We've also got the word aim here. Spell check won't pick up on these words for you because they are words and they're spelt correctly. That's why it's important to read it back to yourself, preferably out loud, so that you can hear words that are wrong for the sentence straight away and that spell check did not pick up on. Ask an adult to read it. So obviously your teacher's going to read it potentially for draft marking. However, they're not going to circle every spelling mistake or every section where it doesn't make sense. Most teachers will only get a few minutes where they can look at that particular assignment to give you feedback. And in some cases, some schools only give cohort feedback, so you're not going to get general feedback on how coherent your assignment is. So ask an older sibling, a grandparent, a parent, a carer, ask them to have a read of it. Now they may not understand all of the maths, but ask them, do my sentences make sense? Can you understand what I'm trying to say? So here's another example. Now I've replaced the type of car here with X brand. So bear in mind it's going to not make sense with X brand in there. But this student has said X brand Sport Ascent Sport car was used as a filter for the types of cars. However, due to some car are unable to identify the distance, not enough data was collected, and thus X brand car are used instead to make up the losing data from the data. What on earth? Not coherent at all. So it's good to get someone else to read it. Obviously, when you were typing it, it made sense to you, but it may not make sense to the reader. Once again, read it again before you submit it. You may find that you've contradicted yourself somewhere. I recently marked 50 PSMTs for 2 different Year 11 General Maths classes, and there were quite a few students that had actually made some comments earlier in the assignment, and then later in the assignment, they contradicted and said the exact opposite. And that affects your coherence. So here's an example. Too close together. Strengths. The sample size was 40, which was 10% of the population. It was a good representation of the overall population. But the sample could have been bigger to be more representative of the population. Now, both could be true. However, the way it's written is a direct contradiction. They've in one hand said it's a good representation, and in the other hand they've said it's not a good representation. It can only be one or the other. So don't contradict yourself. Coherence is also about your spelling, your grammar, and your punctuation. However, this is a maths assignment, not an English assignment. So you can make spelling mistakes in your assignment and not be penalised. However, what you do need to be aware of is that if every second or third word, or there's a word in every sentence that's spelt incorrectly, this is going to affect your coherence. And that's why it's important to make sure that you look at your spell check and make sure that you've got correct punctuation in correct places so that your coherence is improved. Also, be very, very careful of thesaurus and synonym tools. Now, I do notice a lot of students, they want to sound intelligent, they want to sound smarter than what they are, and so they pull out the thesaurus or the synonym tool in Word, and then they replace words here, there, and everywhere. It's not really necessary in a maths report. We don't mind if you use the same word for association 15 times in the assignment, as long as it's not 15 times in the one sentence, because that would be not very coherent. But when we overuse the thesaurus and synonym to try and be too fancy with our language and too descriptive, we actually move away from the genre and become more of storytellers or writing a book, and that's not what we're doing here. So here's an example of a decent sentence changed with thesaurus, and you can see sometimes it just doesn't work. So the results are reasonable because in real life it is expected that one's leg length will be longer than their arm length, and that both will grow in proportion to one another. Yeah, that's a decent, simple sentence. Didn't have to be all fancy with our language. However, when we threw that one into the synonym tool in Word, this is what we ended up with. The fallouts are judicious because in tangible lifespan, it is projected that one's limb span will be lengthier than their arm distance, and that mutually will cultivate in quantity to one alternative. Basically, all I did was threw that first sentence in word by word and found an alternative. But now you can see the second sentence makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. We've just basically ripped that coherence straight out of it. Simple language is fine. It's a maths assignment. You don't need to be writing Shakespeare. So don't feel like you need to be all poetic on your teacher. Keep it simple. One thing you do need to be avoiding is saying things like etc. and much more and many more. Be precise. So here they've said that they've used these 3 websites, etc. Well, how many more websites were used? If there was only one more, put it in the sentence. Or just say used a range of online resources, refer to appendix for a full bibliography. Don't say etc. because it really is not precise and specific language. And in mathematics, we want to be precise and specific. If you're using numbers in paragraphs when you're writing, it's customary to round those to 2 decimal places. So you can see that in this particular student, they've left every decimal on. And yes, that's important for your calculation purposes to leave numbers on your calculator. But when you're actually talking about that, it really reduces how coherent that sentence is, particularly when you've got loads of numbers in the one sentence. It really makes it very hard to read. So simplify that a little bit further. Also think about breaking up new ideas into new paragraphs. So you can see this is one student's section, part of their evaluation. They've actually got a number of ideas in this particular big paragraph. Here's their first idea. It's about the equation that they developed. And then they've moved on and started talking about extrapolation. Then they've gone back to their first idea and started talking about the least squared regression line again, and then they've moved on to a fourth idea, which is coefficient of determination. It would be far better to split those up into new paragraphs or even to put subtitles in between them to break those new ideas up and make it more coherent. Massive paragraphs like this, anytime you change direction with your thoughts, you should really be starting with a new paragraph. Otherwise, it's too unwieldy for your reader and it affects your coherence. Think about as well if you're repeating yourself unnecessarily in the same paragraph. Sometimes I see students are trying to elaborate and they're trying to justify and trying to document, but all they're doing is just repeating themselves in a numerous different ways. So here we can see they've said from the middle of the paragraph, the moderate strength is since the points aren't exactly in a small area where the gradual decrease could be clearly seen. It is moderate because the points are further away. They've basically said that, and then so it's linear and moderate. Okay, so they've said it 3 times. Not necessary. Once would have been sufficient. Let's move on now and talk about what it means to be concise. So we need to make sure we're meeting the requirements of our page limit and our word count. And this is really important. Every school will have different policies on what they do if you go over your word limit or over your word count or over your page limit. Very, very important to stay within those. So we can avoid some certain shortcuts though. A lot of us think that if we shrink our graphs really small, then we're going to be able to fit everything into the 10 pages. And then what we end up with is with graphs that you can't read. And so that affects our solve results and also our communication results to some extent because it's not concise. I can't read that. I'm pretty sure you can't either. That's the actual size it was in the assignment. It's kind of pointless really. So don't shrink your graphs like that. Okay, make sure they're the right size that people can read them. People often use tiny fonts as well. They move down to a 7-point font or an 8-point font. Teachers don't have x-ray visions. Most of us need glasses to read, and even when we put our glasses on, if we can't read your assignment, then you've missed the whole point of being concise altogether. So we also don't want to have super tiny margins either. Teachers need to be able to write feedback to your assignment in the margins. So don't go with shortcuts like that. Instead, why not consider a few of these tips? Eliminating your white space through the use of tables. And I've talked about this across various videos. So rather than having a whole lot of dot points down one side of the page and all this white space here on the right hand side, what you could do is put these points into a table together, and that makes that white space used more effectively and also frees up a lot of your page count as well. Consider the appropriate use of appendices. Now, this is something you need to be really careful of, because a lot of students think, right, I'm going to stick everything in the appendix and I'll just have the words in the body and then everything else is going in the appendix. Well, appendices aren't marked. Even if you refer to the appendices and say, please see Appendix 3 for XYZ, it's still not marked. So your formulas need to be in the body of your assignment. Your working needs to be in the body of your assignment. Or your key argument needs to be in the body of the assignment. But some of the evidence, for example, you may have a population of 50 that you've selected a sample of 20 from. You could put the 20 in the body and the 50 in the appendix, for example. You may have, for example, a hand-drawn scatter plot that you've scanned into the body. You might put the actual original hand-drawn scatter plot in the appendix. So consider how you would use your appendices appropriately. There are also a number of single words in English that can be used to summarize a whole phrase. For example, the word consequently is a word that means as was previously stated, or subsequently means after that. So we can actually use words like that, and it reduces our word count. So just make sure you're using them very effectively and that they actually are the right word for the context, not just something you've plucked out of the synonym or thesaurus. Okay, let's talk now about organisation of our assignment. How do we set it up so that we meet the organisation requirement of communication? Firstly, some little tips. Number your pages in your footer. Why not do that as you're starting the assignment? Just get the page numbers on there. Make sure all of your graphs, tables, appendices, and figures are all named as well. Figure 1, graph 1. Here's some examples here. We've got graph 2 and table 3. So when you do that though, it's really important that you actually just refer then back to that information. So rather than saying as shown in the above table, you could say as shown in table 3. Also, try to keep your discussion about a graph and a table or a concept with the actual graph. So sometimes I will see situations where a student will dump everything, all the formulas in the one place. They'll have this page and it'll just be screenshots of formulas. So notice here, they've got figure 4. That's wonderful. They've named it figure 4. But then this was for a discussion that went 3 pages earlier. It would have been far better to actually put that screenshot of those formulas with the discussion that they're related to. And this section at the bottom was actually for a graph that was presented 2 pages afterwards. So this really affected their organisation because they've basically just dumped every formula that they're using onto the one page rather than putting this little first section with the discussion that it was related to and then these formulas with the graph that they created. So keep your information together. Be careful not to repeat yourself in multiple places in the same report. We've already talked about repetition in the same paragraph, but sometimes students might repeat different parts within the assignment. In fact, I recently saw an assignment where the same graph was repeated in multiple parts of the assignment. They put it in section 2.5 in Solve and then put it in section 3.1 as well, several pages apart, but it was exactly the same graph. They talked about it in slightly different ways, but it would have been far better to have presented that once with the whole discussion together. Sometimes this could be something that occurs because you've done your assignment over multiple days or weeks, and that's why it's a great idea to read it again at the end and you pick up on these repetitions. Okay, use your subheadings to break up the work into logical subsections. So once again, we've got this same example that we used earlier. It would have been far better to have actually broken that up into some little sections with different subheadings. And avoid paragraphs that are separated from their subheading. So sometimes we see situations where the paragraph heading, introduction, is at the bottom of page 2, but then the actual words that goes with it are on the next page. Now I know why students do this is because they're trying to really minimize their page count, but it also then affects your organization. It would have been better to bring that introduction heading down with the introduction itself. Let's now talk about what it means to have an appropriate genre and structure. So our genre that we're writing here is a mathematical report, and that means we are writing in the third person, so we're not using words like I, me, or we, and we're not using words like you or us or them. Okay, so avoid that kind of language. We want to keep our language fairly professional, direct, and simple. So once again, we don't need flowery descriptions. We're not writing poetry or Shakespeare. Keep it very simple. Avoid that emotional language. We don't need emotion and descriptions and adjectives like that. So when I'm describing a correlation, I'm not going to say the correlation is horribly weak or terribly weak or disastrously weak. It's just weak. So keep it simple. Write your paragraphs in peel paragraphs. You would have learned about these in schools. P for point or topic, explain, and then evidence, and then link to the next paragraph that you're going to be writing. And if you follow that peel structure and keep each paragraph about 4 to 5, 6 sentences at the maximum, then you'll keep that coherence going well too. A suitable introduction is written usually in the future tense, which means that you'll say what your report is going to say. This report will. So we're talking about, we haven't done the report yet, what we're going to do in the future with this report. It should only be about a paragraph long. It doesn't go for very long at all, so keep it simple. You should be able to understand what the report's about without reading the task sheet from your introduction, and that is really important. So cover up the rest of your assignment. Just read the introduction. If that summarizes your assignment, perfect. Ask an adult, do you know what my assignment's about, just from reading this, and get them to tell you what they think the assignment's about. And if they're off track, then you haven't done the right thing with your introduction. It also needs a suitable body. It should be written in the present tense or in a past tense. Graph 1 shows this, or the median height was. And then we need a suitable conclusion. And this is also written in the past tense. We're basically summarizing very simply at the end what the report investigated and what it found. It should only be about a paragraph long, and a lot of assignments, students actually do forget to write their conclusion altogether. They do their evaluation and just end it there. It actually does need a conclusion. What did you find? What did you investigate? And what was the result overall? So what were all the key findings? What is the answer to the question of the task? You shouldn't be introducing any new ideas in that in that conclusion. It should just be a very brief summary. So someone should actually be able to read just the conclusion as well. And if you asked an adult, can you read my conclusion and tell me what the assignment was about? They should be able to summarize that to you as well. And if they're on track, you know you're on track too. Well, that's all we've got time for in this video today. I hope you found it really helpful. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notifications button so you'll always know when there's a new video. You can tell a friend or a teacher about how this video helped you with your assignment. Tell us in the comments as well. And why not share this on social media? You can actually put this on your Facebook page and share it with your friends there. And if you've got any questions, you can always contact me at mcclutchymass@yahoo.com or direct message on Facebook and Instagram. Well, I'm Natalie McClutchy. Do stay tuned for our final video in this series. It's also on communication, where we'll be looking at the last dot point on our ISMG. It's video 11, coming soon. Have a lovely day.